All right, welcome back to ABA exam review in the continuation of our RBT practice exam series where we're going through another set of questions together and breaking them down. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Please like and subscribe. Check out btexamreview.com for all of our study materials, including our combo pack. When you pass, let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. Let's get going. James wasn't going to order a beer at dinner tonight, but all of his friends ordered one, so James decided he would get one too. His friends ordering the beer functioned as a blank. When we are looking at the function of some part of our contingency, as in the antecedent, the behavior, or the consequence, you want to ask yourself a couple of questions. First, when did the behavior occur? If it occurred before the response, then it's an antecedent. If it occurred after, then it's a consequence. So we're looking at James and his relative to his friends ordering the beer. He wasn't going to order the beer, but then his friends did order, and so James decided he would get one too. So his friends ordering the beer was an antecedent to James getting a beer. Now, if we're having an antecedent, it's going to be either an MO, an SD, or a prompt. Well, it's not a prompt here because the prompt comes after the SD. So it's either going to be a motivating operation or a discriminative stimulus. And what's the difference? A motivating operation makes you want or not want something, while an SD signals a consequence is available. And that's simplifying it, but we want to keep it simple. So if something occurs as an antecedent that makes you want or not want something, in other words, the value of the consequence increases, that's going to be a motivating operation. In this case, James can order a beer at any time. There are plenty of SDs around where if he orders a beer, he will get the beer. But only when his friends order the beer does he actually do it. And why? Because his friends ordering the beer increased the value of James getting his own beer and ordering that beer. It made James want the beer more. So his friends ordering the beer functioned as the motivating operation. Don't get too confused with the technical details. An easy way to remember it and to think about it, even though it is simplified, a motivating operation makes you want or not want something, while the SD signals that something is available. Samuel and his family take a road trip every 3 months to somewhere around the country. As they drive, they usually stop and pick something up to eat from a drive through restaurant, usually Chick-fil-A or McDonald's. What would these restaurants be considered? All right, let's think about these restaurants. We're looking at Chick-fil-A and McDonald's. And in what context are we talking about these restaurants? Because the question's kind of vague. What are these restaurants considered? Well, first, they're obviously stimuli, right? Because the restaurants aren't responses. So they've got to be stimuli. And so immediately, that's going to give us a pretty good idea of what our answer is. Because when Samuel and his family take this road trip, they're driving and they want to get something to eat. The Chick-fil-A and the McDonald's both evoke the same behavior of going through the drive-through and ordering the food. And so when you have stimuli that are evoking the same functional response, what do we call that? A, responses. The restaurants aren't the responses. The family ordering the food might be the responses, but the restaurants are stimuli. The restaurants are not response classes because in order to be a response class, you have to first be a response, of course. So we're not talking about response classes here, responses that serve the same function. What we're talking about are stimuli, such as the two different restaurants that are evoking the same response. So these restaurants would be considered a stimulus class, a class of stimuli that are evoking the same functional response. And of course, it's not a behavior, right? And so, pretty straightforward question because as long as you recognize that Chick-fil-A and McDonald's are stimuli and not responses, well, you can eliminate A, B, and D pretty easily. But if there was an answer choice that was a little more difficult, then you could narrow it down by saying, well, both of these are stimuli or individual stimulus, and together they form a class because they're both evoking the same functional response, which is the family coming and ordering food. So these restaurants are going to be considered a stimulus class. You'd planned to go to the farmer's market today with your family, but the wind was gusting when you stepped outside. You don't go outside for the rest of the day. The gusting wind is blank relative to going outside. So let's think about this. We're looking at the gusting wind relative to going outside. Now, is the gusting wind an antecedent or a consequence? Well, we plan to go to the farmer's market, but when you go outside, the wind gusts. So the wind gusting or the gusting wind is the consequence for you going outside. Now, in order to identify what type of consequence it is, we have to see, well, what effect did it have on behavior? Well, here it decreased your behavior because you don't go outside the rest of the day. So if your behavior was decreased, it's either going to be extinction or punishment. In this case, it's going to be punishment because something was added. Remember, extinction is just when we withhold something. Punishment, we add or take away something. So we know it's punishment. Now, is it positive or is it negative? Well, was the wind gusting added or taken away? Well, it was added. Once you stepped outside, all of a sudden you're getting hit with these gusts of wind. Your behavior was punished and it was positively punished. So it isn't A, it isn't positive reinforcement, or C, negative reinforcement, because your behavior decreased. You don't go outside the rest of the day. And the reason you don't is because of the gusting wind, which is functioning as positive punishment. Negative means we would have taken away something. The wind, the gusting wind was added as you stepped outside, punishing your behavior. A mathematician will sometimes talk to himself while solving complex problems. Talking to himself helps the mathematician work through roadblocks he encounters while solving the problem. What could the function of talking to himself be if it helps remove the roadblocks? All right, let's think about this, right? So, very specifically, we're looking at the talking to himself, and we're trying to identify the function or the reason it's occurring. Now, it's helping remove the roadblocks. But be careful here, right? Because the mathematician is talking to himself. And so if you're doing something that isn't socially mediated or the consequence isn't delivered by another person, we're going to call that automatic, right? And so the mathematician talking to himself does not involve a second person. So this is automatic behavior. But remember, some behaviors can have more than one function. So we can't just stop at automatic, because what else is the behavior doing? Well, the behavior is also removing the roadblocks. And so when you remove an aversive stimulus, you've escaped. So the function of talking to himself isn't going to be attention, A, because he's not gaining the attention of anyone in his environment, but it could be escape. Why could it be escape? Because talking to himself removes the roadblocks. He escapes the roadblocks. But it could also be automatic because there's not another person involved. Talking to himself could also be feel good to him, right? And so automatic sensory. The function of talking to himself could be escape or automatic. This is a more tricky question, which is why we took a little more time in the beginning, right? You can't rush to answer questions like this because you have to really think about what purpose is that behavior serving. Talking to himself is both the automatic behavior and he's escaping. So the function of talking to himself could be escape or automatic or even both. If you were told to use a whole interval procedure for 5 minutes, which of the following interval will be the most sensitive to behavior change? Now, this is a good question. This is a very behavior analytic question. Let's think about it. We're going to use a whole interval procedure for 5 minutes. So 5 minutes is our time. We need to make intervals. With the whole interval procedure, the behavior has to happen the whole time. If we're looking at an interval that's going to be most sensitive to behavior change, what does that mean? Well, it means what interval is going to register and pick up the most behavior consistently. Well, if you think about it, if you have a 1 minute interval and that behavior has to happen that whole entire minute. Well, one, you're only going to have 5 intervals, and 2, that behavior has to happen a long time. That behavior might happen for 45 seconds and you're never going to get a data point. It's not very sensitive to behavior change. Contrast that with 10-second intervals, where you are now really going to see a lot of data because the behavior has to happen only for 10 seconds and you have a lot more intervals. So, when we talk about measurements that are sensitive to behavior change, we mean measurements that are actively picking up behavior as it happens and to a very significant amount. And so, the smaller the interval in a whole or partial interval procedure, the more sensitive it is to behavior change. So the interval the most sensitive to behavior change would be 10 seconds. That's a more high level measurement question. So try to understand that thought processes. Why would the smaller, shorter interval, which gives you more intervals, be more sensitive? Well, you have more opportunities for data collection, and the intervals are shorter, giving the client more time to respond and for you to collect that data. Again, whole interval has got to happen the entire time. Which of the following interventions would not be considered a consequence intervention? Let's finish with a pretty easy one. Consequence intervention, of course, is going to happen after the response. So we're looking for the intervention not considered that. Well, what about A, timeout? Timeout would follow the response because timeout would be a punishment procedure for a response. A response cost would also be a punishment procedure following a response. A non contingent reinforcement procedure, though, would come before the response because you're trying to typically reduce motivation to respond when using a non contingent reinforcer. So, when you use a non contingent reinforcement intervention, you're using an antecedent intervention. So, which of the following would not be considered a consequence intervention? Well, that's going to be B, non contingent reinforcement. All right, thanks for watching. Some difficult questions today. So if you did well, fantastic. If not, that's okay. Keep working hard, keep reviewing. As always, subscribe if you have not already. Check out btexamreview.com. Let us know when you pass. Work hard, study hard. See you soon.